Today, we're going to dig into something pretty chilling. We're looking at how some of the most violent extremist ideologies aren't just surviving, they're being systematically brought back to life and put to work in Syria. We're going to trace this whole thing from some shocking online hate speech all the way back to a 13th century scholar and see how it all connects to a very modern, very dangerous strategy of engineered chaos. So let's get into it. Why don't we just slaughter them? I mean, just listen to that. It's a brutal, chilling question. The kind of thing that's designed to just stop you in your tracks. So, let me ask you, where do you think a line like that was said? On some battlefield, maybe? In the secret diary of a terrorist leader? Well, the real source is somehow even more disturbing. Yeah, this call for mass murder was found in the private chats of medical students. Let that sink in for a second. The very people training to save lives were casually talking about how to end them. And this wasn't happening in some obscure corner of the internet. We're talking about students at Damascus University, Syria's oldest, largest, most prestigious institution. This is where our story starts, in a place that's supposed to be about learning, but seems to be incubating a whole other kind of lesson. Okay, so first, let's just look at the symptom, this wave of hate speech that's been documented on campus. Human rights monitors who've looked at this say these aren't just random, angry comments. No, they see it as a calculated, systematic pattern of dehumanization. And we're not talking about isolated incidents. It's a clear, disturbing pattern. You have students openly wishing that the former leader of ISIS was still around, saying that if al-Baghdadi were alive, the city of Ceuta would have been turned to ashes. You have them running polls that show favor for bringing back ISIS-style governance, calling for ISIS prisons to be reopened. They even described the forced displacement of minority civilians as a gift. This is the classic language of dehumanization. It's designed to make violence seem not just okay, but necessary. But rhetoric like this, so violent and so coordinated, it doesn't just pop up out of thin air, right? It has to be fed. It has to be taught. So that leads to the really crucial question, where is this ideology actually coming from? And that brings us to the mechanism, what analysts are calling a deliberate ideological pipeline, one that's been built specifically to radicalize a new generation. And this isn't just happening online. Look at this scene from Damascus. You see hundreds of people lining up to get free books. But this isn't some literacy drive. This is a mass distribution campaign, and they're all getting texts from a single, very controversial medieval theologian, whose work, by the way, happens to form the ideological bedrock for groups like al-Qaeda and ISIS. The man at the center of it all is Ahmad ibn Taymiyyah, a scholar who lived over 700 years ago, and his ideas are being weaponized for the 21st century. So, to really understand what's happening today, we need to go back. We need to look at the source code. Who exactly was Ibn Taymiyyah, and why is his legacy still so explosive? Well, his legacy is deeply polarized, to put it mildly. To his supporters, he's Sheikh al-Islam, a great reformer, a defender of the faith. But to his critics, he's a source of extremism. They accuse him of inspiring Takfiri violence. That's the practice of declaring other Muslims to be apostates, which is then used as a justification to kill them. Many today see him as nothing less than the spiritual father of modern jihadist groups like ISIS. So, which of his ideas are being used today? Well, he famously declared fellow Muslims that he disagreed with as internal enemies and argued that killing them was actually more obligatory than fighting off foreign invaders. He issued religious rulings against common practices like visiting tombs. And most importantly, he advocated for takfir, the excommunication of entire Muslim communities like Shiites and Sufis. This is the theological DNA that al-Qaeda and ISIS would later copy and paste into their own manifestos. Okay, so now let's connect the dots. Let's see how this historical ideology is being built into very real contemporary violence. Because this isn't just about old books, it's about turning words into weapons. This slide really lays out the long arc of this ideology. You can see this dark thread running through history. It starts back in the 13th century, it gets a reboot in the 18th century as the basis for Wahhabism, and then it's updated again in the 20th century for modern Islamists. And that brings us to our century, where groups like al-Qaeda and ISIS explicitly build their entire worldview on his work, leading directly to the recent attacks on minority civilians we're seeing in Syria. And please, don't think for a second that this is theoretical. This dehumanizing rhetoric has devastating real-world consequences. On the left, you see the ruins of a historic site destroyed in an act of sectarian violence. And on the right, a vigil for Eli Simon Takla, a 21-year-old Christian man who was shot dead in a targeted assassination. This is it. This is the tangible, tragic outcome when that ideology is translated into action. But here's the thing. As horrifying as these attacks are, they are part of a much larger and much more calculated strategy. This isn't just about terror. It's about engineering chaos on a regional scale. Take this for example. HTS, the Islamist group that controls the region, recently started building a new dam on the Euphrates River. Now, that river is a lifeline for millions of people downstream in Iraq. The goal here seems pretty clear: to weaponize water. By controlling the flow, they can potentially create a massive humanitarian crisis in Iraq. We're talking agricultural collapse, social upheaval. And what happens when a society is desperate and chaotic? You create the absolute perfect conditions for sectarian violence and a whole new wave of extremist recruitment. It's a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. So, when you put all of these pieces together, the online hate, the ideological indoctrination, the strategic destabilization, you realize you're not just looking at random acts of extremism. You are looking at a system. And it works just like an assembly line. Step 1. You use online discourse to dehumanize your targets, make them seem less than human. Step 2. You provide the ideological software, that 700-year-old justification for violence, through these mass book giveaways. And then step 3, you connect that ideology to real-world attacks and huge strategic projects designed to create the very chaos where extremism thrives. As one counter-terrorism expert put it when observing all of this, every young person picking up these books today could become a radicalized fighter tomorrow. This is not education, it's assembly line extremism. And that leaves us with one final and, frankly, critical question. We've seen exactly how these ideas have been used to justify unspeakable suffering and violence throughout history. So what does it mean to deliberately place that same toxic ideology into the hands of a new, traumatized, and unemployed generation? What comes next?